they find there amongst the people Abdurrahman ibn Auf and Uthman ibn Affan. And they ask him, so what is it? Like, we came all this way to meet him, and he's not. So they say, let's take you to Ali ibn Abi Talib, because he probably knows him best, right? He grew up in his household. So Ali tells them, he goes, look, it's probably based on what you're wearing. What I recommend is you go back, change into your travel clothing. Now, not travel clothing for 2 hours on the train or 5 hours on a bus, but what you've been wearing for, like, who knows how long, 2 weeks maybe or so. Change back into that and then come back. So they take his advice, they go back, they put on their clothing, and they come to the Prophet ﷺ. And the Prophet ﷺ is almost completely changed. Ahlan sahlan, how are you? Welcome, please. And when he was asked about this, he says, when they first came in, I saw that there was a shaitan with them. Now, I want to stop here for a second and take a point of benefit. And this point of benefit is what you'll notice as we move forward in this narrative, in this incident. You'll find that the Prophet ﷺ actually has a full-fledged debate with the Christians of Najran. And we see debates. You see them on YouTube, you see Speaker's Corner, everyone's trying to, what's the term? Finish the other person, right? You're finished, or whatever the term is. And so you're always trying to debate people to just wrap them up. But now look at how the Prophet ﷺ is addressing the issue before you get to the debate and the debate topics. Meaning, there's a predisposition of the person you're talking to. If you're coming in from the vantage point of having clothes that are ornate, that are ostentatious, it signals that you're coming from a place where you think you are superior. So the discussion is, you're already at a disadvantage. Because remember, the thing that convinced people about Islam is not necessarily the strength of the rational argument. It's much more than that. Because you could, and if you think about it, the one impediment for people accepting Islam was not that they didn't rationally understand Islam or that it wasn't clear to them. The main impediment, more than anything else, can anyone guess what it would be? Strength. No, you're not going to wrestle someone. Well, okay, I'll give you a hint. What was Shaitan's problem? Evil? It's a specific type of evil. Kibr. Pride. Someone said it. Kibr. Right? Shaitan, look, if you talk about knowledge, Shaitan has more knowledge than all of us. Right? He's with the angels. He sees everything. He's addressed by Allah. I mean, it's not about knowledge now. What was his problem? Right? Ana khayrun min. I'm better than him. You want me to prostrate to Adam? He's made out of, all this substance. I'm made out of fire. Why would I do that? Point being that whenever you see people presented with Islam, it's not just simply defeating them rationally or having them, in a sense, submit rationally. You look at Abu Jahl. What was his problem? When he was asked, okay, this man, do you not believe he's a prophet? Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam? He says, no, it's not about that. It's the fact that we have had a competition from the very beginning. They're part of Banu Hashim, we're part of Banu Makhzum. We've been, they would give the water to the Hajjaj, we would give water to the Hajjaj, right? They would give water to the people making Hajj, we would do the same. They would give them food, we would give them food. So we had this competition, and now they're saying they have a prophet. How can we compete with that? I will never accept him as a prophet. So what was the issue? The Fir'aun of this ummah, Abu Jahl, his impediment was ego. So right off the bat, we see when the Prophet ﷺ sees what's going on with just the way they're approaching the Prophet ﷺ, immediately he knows that there could be an ego problem. Because if you're coming that ornate, that ostentatious, you're coming from a position like, yes, we are royal and people of authority. When in fact, the discussion needs to be at a lot lower, bringing them down. And that's one of the benefits, perhaps, Allahu A'lam, that where they change clothes. And by the way, there's a whole section that I talk about related to color theory. But I'm going to save that for some other day because of time. Now, coming back to the narration itself, one of the aspects that we know is that when the Prophet ﷺ starts having discussions with the Christians of Najran, they start asking him about Isa alayhi salam. But as they're asking him, there's an audience. So a lot of times we think that, the da'wah has to be like a one-to-one, right? That maybe an audience is not a good idea. But here the Prophet ﷺ is showing us that, in fact, he's having this discussion. And by the way, the audience isn't just Muslims. How do we know this? Because there were Jews that were in that audience and they started arguing with the Christians. They started saying, like, your man, Isa, is nothing. Like, they started cursing Isa alayhi salam, na'udhu billah. And the Christians in response started to curse Musa alayhi salam. It just shows their ignorance, right? So they started cursing Musa alayhi salam. And they're going at each other. And Allah mentions this in the Quran when they say that the Jews say, you're upon nothing. وَقَالَتِ الْيَهُودُ, like the Yahud say that you're upon nothing. You're not upon anything. And the Christians say you're not upon anything either. وَهُمْ يَتْلُونَ الْكِتَابِ, and they both recite the book together. They both believe in the Old Testament, which we'll get into more details tomorrow, bi'idhnillah. Okay? So there's an audience there. Now, the fact that there's an audience, again, there were certain topics that were addressed. And I'll mention them briefly, because my point isn't to focus on just the narrative itself. Debate topics. Number one, the claim of divinity of Jesus due to his unique miracles. So they said, look, what other prophet do you know heals the lepers, brings people back to life, and so on, right? Then he mentioned other ones. The second debate topic, the claim of divinity of Jesus due to misconstruing Jesus being Allah's word, God's word, and a spirit from him. So because they said, look, your Quran itself says that Isa alayhi salam is ruh and is kalima. So if that's the case, if he's ruh and kalima, if he's a spirit, so we say that he's also the word of God and he's the spirit. And they started to have discussion related to this. The third one was the claim of divinity of Isa, of Jesus, due to being born without a father. Okay? All of these claims, ayat were sent down. You can find them in Surah Ali Imran. Again, I'm not going to get into details. That's for another day, another time. But as these debates happen, they culminate. And this is what I think is very interesting. Typically, when you're debating someone, what's the end point? How do you finish the debate? Who wants to help me out here? How do you know when it's, okay, this is enough? Like, we've gone too long. Especially when it's a heated debate. And take it out of the context of non-Muslims. Let's say you're arguing with your wife. Okay, what's the end? Silence. Okay, I think he got the point about the wife. He's like, all right, khalas. That's like we're done, right? Okay, what did you say? You were mentioning something? Yeah, you're going round and round and round. Okay, good. So now you know, okay, look, man, we're just going in circles. You're not understanding me. I'm not. Sorry? Everyone talks, no one listens. Okay. What I find fascinating is that this happens to the Prophet ﷺ. Because when this last topic comes up, remember I said the topic was the claim of divinity of Jesus being due to being born without a father. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Inna mathala Isa inda Allahi ka mathali Adam. The likeness of Jesus is like Adam. خَلَقَهُ مِن تُرَابٍ. He created him from dust. ثُمَّ قَالَ لَهُ كُن فَيَكُونَ. And he said to it, be, and it is. In other words, what is the rationality behind the argument? The argument is very simple. You're saying that Jesus doesn't have a father, therefore God is his father, but Adam alayhi salam didn't have a father or a mother. So by that logic, Adam should be the son of God or God, right? So it doesn't make sense. But this is at the end of a full day or maybe more than one day of argumentation going back and forth. And it's after this point where the mubahala happens. Meaning, how is the debate finished? It's finished because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sends down, and by the way, these are ayat that are being sent down from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَمَنْ حَاجَكَ فِيهِ مِن بَعْدِ مَا جَاءَكَ مِنَ الْعِلْمِ. Then whoever argues with you about it after this knowledge has come to you. We sent you responses. They had a claim, we sent you a response. They had a claim, we sent you a response. They had a claim, we've been sending you down ayat, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says. All right? So now, that's it. We're going, someone said, going in circles, as someone said. Yeah? So now what does Allah say? فَقُلْ. Now Allah tells the Prophet, tell them, تَعَالَوْا. Let's come together. نَدْعُوا أَبْنَاءَنَا وَأَبْنَاءَكُمْ وَنِسَاءَنَا وَنِسَاءَكُمْ وَأَنفُسَنَا وَأَنفُسَكُمْ. So now let's call your children and our children. We'll call our children, you call your children. We'll call our women, our mothers and our sisters and our daughters, you call your women. And we'll bring ourselves and you bring yourself. For what? So, ثُمَّ نَبَتَهِلْ فَنَجْعَلْ لَعْنَةَ اللَّهِ عَلَى الْكَاذِبِينَ. So that after that, when we bring these people together, we will supplicate earnestly. We will ask Allah to curse the people that are lying. Because either you're right or I'm right. Right? Is essentially what the Prophet ﷺ is saying. Now, when the Christians of Najran hear this, now first of all, if the person is sincere, this is a good kind of litmus test. And by the way, you don't start your da'wah off with this. I need to make a kind of a disclaimer here. You don't start off with this. You say, okay, you bring your people, we'll bring our people, and the ta'al, right? I mean, that's not where you, but at the end, notice the Prophet ﷺ, after all of these steps, finishes, right, with this. So now, the Christians of Najran, they hear this, and they say, give us some time to think about it. We'll tell you tomorrow. Now, one of the things I appreciate about this is that it's almost like if a person is sincere, it's almost like a litmus test, right? Because if they really do believe in Allah, and their belief is sound, and they believe in their argument, they'd say, okay, let's bring it. But notice, the Christian of Najran said, hold on a second, we'll let you know tomorrow, okay? The next day, the Prophet ﷺ brings his family. He brings Fatima, he brings Hassan and Hussein, he brings the whole family. Let's go, right? Let's do it. So the Christians of Najran, they had the discussion the night before. They said, look, we cannot do this because there's no prophet that did this mubahala, invoked this on people except those people were destroyed. So we're not going to do this. We cannot do this, okay? Now, one thing I forgot to mention, this is a finer point of the ayah itself. And one thing, just appreciate it for a second. You see, there's a punishment of the destruction itself. But then there's a psychological punishment that's part of this ayah too. Why? Because notice the order at which things are being destroyed. So meaning if you're the one that's invoking the curse, you're saying, we'll bring our children, you bring your children. We'll bring our women, you bring your women. We'll bring ourselves, and you bring yourself. Why is that order, why does that in and of itself have a certain psychological sort of damage on the person? Why? Because it's one thing to just be destroyed and not witness your own children and your own women folk be destroyed. But notice the order, it's like first you're going to see your kids get destroyed, then you'll see your women get destroyed, and then in the end you get destroyed. So first you go through the psychological trauma of watching all of that happen, and then so it's a curse upon a curse. Anyway, so the Christians of Najran come to the Prophet ﷺ. They say, look, we're not going to do this. We agree to the jizya, right? You've sent in the letter. If you agree, we agree. All right, so they construct a type of contract saying this is what your jizya will be, this is what your tax will be, or so on. I don't like to call it a tax, and so now they take this document and they're walking out of the city. They're walking out of Medina. Now, on the way out from Medina, it so happens that some of the Christians of Najran sent a few more people behind them, right? Say, okay, what's going on with them? We haven't heard from them or whatever it may be. Go send and see what's... So as they're leaving Medina, they run into one of this group. Amongst this group is another usquf, another bishop, another leader. And with him is his half-brother named Bishr ibn Muawiyah, right? Now, when they meet each other, the Christians that had just got done having that discussion and dialogue with the Prophet ﷺ hand the usquf, the one that's coming to Medina, the document. As he's reading it, Bishr, his camel slips. And so as it slips, his foot kind of twists a little bit, and he curses the Prophet ﷺ. And so the usquf, the one that's going to Medina, says, don't do that. And he says, why? He goes, because he's a true prophet. And so Bishr says, what do you mean? After all this, you saw the document and you agreed with the document because he read it. He said, yeah, it's fine. Why wouldn't you just accept the message and go back? So what does the usquf say? He says, Bishr, look at everything we have. Look at the clothing that the Byzantium Empire gives us. The Romans, they give us these churches. They provide us with money. And think about all of the respect that the people have for religious authority. We would lose all of that. So Bishr says, khalas, ma salama. He goes to Medina, accept Islam at the hands of the Prophet ﷺ, and in some narrations, he died in one of the battles as a shaheed. Okay? The second point that I'll mention with this story, and this is where we'll enter into evangelicalism in a second, is that look at what is the second factor that's preventing them. So it may not be ego, But it's something that many of us have to go through, and that's hubb dunya. It's a love for this world. That in and of itself could be a preventative factor. Okay? So two things we mentioned. Obviously, there's intellectual arguments that were part of the debate itself. Prior to that, there's an analysis of the person's spiritual state in terms of their ego. And at the end, there's this concept of hubb dunya as well. So there are multiple reasons as to why people would not accept Islam. It's not just simply rational arguments, right? We're not rational robots. We're psycho-spiritual, emotive beings that are very complex. And once you realize that, and then you start making da'wah, you'll find you will have a much deeper appreciation for the da'wah of the prophets and messengers, right? Especially if you get out of this box of just rational arguments. Okay, now moving on. There's a question that I'll be diving into much deeper tomorrow. And that question is, why is it that evangelicals support Israel and Zionism so passionately? You know, we live in a time where the reason why Donald Trump can take an AI video of Gaza, showing it like a casino and all this other nonsense, you know, basically building all of this stuff over the graves of our mothers and our children, right? They'll make it easy for them and give them relief. Why? What gives him, you know, what gives him the audacity to do that? What gives him the audacity is that, A, he's president, okay, but what put him there? The evangelical vote in this country they make up 25% of the voting bloc. Now, I'm not telling you to go vote, so that's not my point here. 25% of the voting bloc, and it's not just 25% of the voting bloc, they have major influence on foreign relations related to Israel. So you might know that the ambassador to Israel, I believe is Mike Huckabee, for those you know. Mike Huckabee has led groups, tours of Israel. And he has a certain disposition or a certain understanding of Christianity, which is called dispensationalism, which we'll get into tomorrow. But by this, he's taking loads and loads of groups. Evangelicals, by far, support Zionism almost blindly, slavishly. You know, sometimes I call it the Stockholm syndrome, right? Like, you guys know what the Stockholm syndrome is? You get kidnapped, and then, you know, pretty soon after your release, you're totally in love with your kidnapper. It's like they got hoodwinked, man. What happened? 1,800 years of church history, and they were at each other's throats. Jews and Christians, we saw that from Najran, they were at each other's throats, and throughout history. Whenever Jews needed refuge, they would come where? To our lands, right? They would come to us. Because they knew that we were people of justice and so on. Our lands were such, much more than now, after 800 years, something happened. Now, I'm not going to tell you what happened because that's tomorrow's lecture, but what I will get into is the following. When we look at, one second. When we look at three issues, these three issues are interlocked, and they're going to be very important in understanding evangelicals and understanding our role vis-a-vis the evangelicals. And here's the argument that I'm going to make. The argument that I'm making today for all of us to think about, to have some introspection on, is that we live in the belly of the beast. We live in the country that is the financial and military backer of what's going on to our brothers and sisters in Gaza. Okay? Not to mention other parts of the world. That being the case, there's a couple of approaches that we can take. One approach is what I call the reactive approach. What that means is, and that's generally a lot of what we've been doing. So we'll go on social media, we'll see the videos, we'll feel something, I hope, inshallah, and we'll say we have to do something. So now, we may go do protests. And protests are good, don't get me wrong. They're absolutely needed. We should be protesting, right? We have to move the needle, we have to protest. Okay, no problem. And we may donate money for humanitarian causes to say, you know what? They need our help, so we should donate money. Like there was a Thinking Muslim podcast. They were interviewing one of the heads of one of these relief organizations, humanitarian organizations. And he says that I called my aunt who lives in Gaza. And I asked her, I said, what did you have for dinner? And this is before the ceasefire. So, she tells, she's trying to circumvent the topic. She doesn't want to tell him. And finally, he gets down to it, he says, just tell me what happened. Just tell me what did you have for dinner? So when she tells him, she said, we had maybe 2 dates and some water, at best. We shared it amongst ourselves. Now, he's the head of a humanitarian organization. This is his aunt. So he says, look, the ceasefire is going to happen soon. We've got trucks ready. I'm head of this organization. We are there. We'll be there. We're coming. His aunt says something to him, and really it just it strikes the core, because she says, don't bother. Because by the time it gets here, we will be dead. Now, I get the sentiment. But one of the things that we have to understand is that while humanitarian work is absolutely necessary and very good, if you want to take an analogy, it's like putting a Band-Aid on a bullet wound. There is trying to now stop the bleeding, and now there's trying to solve the issue. When you do humanitarian work, and I'm not discouraging it, don't take this and he said don't. I'm not saying that. We need humanitarian work. We need protests, but these are all reactive. And perhaps for some of us, maybe it's a way to placate our guilt. Maybe. That's for you, and it's between you and Allah, right? How do we now move from being people of reaction to being proactive people? Because the people of Gaza themselves, they say that there's not one household in Gaza except that they have a picture of Baytul Maqdis, right? Mashal al-Aqsa, excuse me, in their house. Why? Because they don't see this as a humanitarian thing. They see this as something much bigger. And until we see it as something much bigger, we may be stuck in just being reactive. So now the question is, what would be proactive? Well, one thing would be to understand the cause. One of those causes is evangelicals that y'all live in Texas, man. Tomorrow when I present the percentage of evangelicals in Texas, they're way more than the entire country, meaning not in number, but percentage. And one of the issues is that most Muslims may not even know what an evangelical is. How do you define it? What is their backdrop? What are things that are important to them? When they say, I took my son and he had a baptism, what does that mean? When they say that Easter is on Sunday, yeah, we know, okay, maybe we know that that's the day that, according to them, that Jesus came back from the dead. According to them. And Good Friday today is good because that's the day he died for the sins of humanity. Okay, but that's a very superficial, basic understanding. When you really understand, okay, so what is Easter about? And then what's the Pentecost? Why is that important? When you see Marco Rubio come on national TV with this big old, ashes on his forehead with a cross that signify Ash Wednesday, what is that about? Remember I talked about Najran? Remember I said that there's more to human beings than just the rational arguments? You have to know their backdrop. What's the culture they're coming from? What is their family life like? What do they believe in? What do they celebrate? Like when I was, I was getting my hair cut, and the guy's like, what are you doing for Easter? Right? And I said, look, man, we don't really celebrate Easter. I'm like, what's up with you for Easter? Because, when I was a kid, we used to roll the eggs and stuff and, chase the bunnies or whatever they do, right? So, and I said, okay, but, tell me a little bit more about your family life. And he started talking about, Easter was very special because we had, these type of things from the Bible and so on, and kind of really trying to connect with him as a human being. And then start talking to him about, okay, there's certain things I want you to think about, right? If we're not equipped with knowledge about the people that are right outside these doors of this masjid, how can we possibly, number one, expect to make da'wah to them? But okay, let's put that aside. That's not for everyone, let's say, right? Although I would say it's for everyone, but okay, khalas. Da'wah is not for everyone. But how do you expect for them to change their mind about what is going on in Gaza? Because what's going on is clear as day. Like I said, they've been hoodwinked, man. So we can't expect that we have just, reactive, just reactions, and that'll eventually solve the problem. And you and I are the only people that can proactively do something, because the Ghazans can't come here and start to interact with the evangelicals and say, look, man, here's the issue. We are their representatives at the end of the day. So, all of that was a pitch for you to register for the conference. Like I said, it's tomorrow. It's 11:30 a.m. to 9 p.m. I know it's long, but it's an academic conference. I'll just mention something about that. Why is it an academic conference? This leads to my second point, because I said there are three. Why is it an academic conference? Why is it that the age limit is 16 plus only? We don't want you to bring your 9-year-olds and 12-year-olds. A couple of reasons, and I'll mention one of them. When we look at our history, our tradition, we find that we, in our tradition, have scholarship that was just amazing. Especially scholarship talking about Christianity, Judaism, Hinduism, and all of these other areas. You look at works by, for instance, Ibn Hazm. Ibn Hazm has a 3-volume set where he has now gone religion by religion, dissecting it, one by one by one. He has sections on Judaism, sections on Christianity, sections on all sorts of things. And obviously he's living in Muslim Spain, so he's having interactions. You have Shahrastani. You have Abu Rayhan al-Biruni. Al-Biruni, amazing. He accompanies Mahmud al-Ghaznawi into India. So if you know anything about Mahmud al-Ghaznawi, he had 17 excursions into the heart of India from Afghanistan, current-day Afghanistan. He would go in, come back, go in, and conquer certain areas and come back. Go in, conquer certain areas and come back, all right? 17. With him is this scholar, Al-Biruni. Now, Al-Biruni writes a book, Kitab al-Hind. He masters 60 to 70 of the dialects in Hind. Now, from anyone that's from that part of the world, you know those are not easy dialects or easy, they may be, completely separate languages or what have you. But he mastered that, and he writes this compendium of the religious landscape of India. Why? Well, because they know they need to know who the people they are going to engage with. This is our tradition. But if I asked you today, in this hall right now, how many people know Hebrew? You might be like, well, why? Why would we need to know Hebrew? Well, because a lot of literature is in Hebrew that you and I don't have access to. A lot of literacy, or a lot of the original texts of the Torah or the Tanakh, right, as it's called, is in Hebrew. And if you don't have access to that, how are you going to have a robust, deeper discussion? How are you going to show that not only are we people that are people of conscience, people of ethics, people of morals, but we are educated, erudite, academic people? That is part of our tradition. That is who we are, right? It's part of our scholarship. And so, and I was mentioning to someone, I said, when you look at a translation of the Torah in Arabic. Does anyone think there's a translation of the Torah in Arabic? What do you think? You think there's one? So here's the thing. There's no translation of the Torah in Arabic done by a Muslim. There's one partial one done by a Christian, and of course one done by a Jew, right? And that's, I think, maybe 4th century something, or much earlier. But no translation by a Muslim. That's not good, right? When you look at, so they have this publication called the Journal of Islamic Studies, right? It comes out of, these Western universities, Harvard, Yale, and they had this publication. When you look at the authors of these studies come from a wide swath of backdrops. So they come from various parts of the world. They come from Japan and China and Australia and the US and all over the place, from different religious backgrounds. So they're Buddhists and they're Hindus and they're Muslims. There's some Muslims in there. There's Christians and there's Jews and all sorts of people are writing the Journal of Islamic Studies, all right, to give academia an understanding of Islam. Okay, the Journal of Judaic Studies. All of the authors are Jewish, 100%. I want you to think about that for a second, right? There's a vantage point that you have to now analyze certain things. The reason why we call this Christianity through an Islamic lens is because we now want to look at Christianity from the lens of truth at the end of the day, right? And we want to look at it from the vantage point of something that is much more erudite, academic, and more sophisticated. We as Muslims in the United States are one of the most affluent minority communities in the US, most wealthiest, and the most educated. If you want to talk about intellectual capital, it's right here. The only thing is, how do you connect this intellectual capital, people that have spent their time studying deeply medicine and law and engineering, and that's, as Imam Tam Fakini says, that's the holy trinity of the Muslims, right? Law, medicine, and engineering, right? Nevertheless, it takes a lot of intellectual backdrop and power to actually study those things. That's not easy. So why not take that and apply it to something that is probably something that we may be asked about? What did you do for your brothers and sisters in Gaza? You were in a specific place at a specific time, and during a specific, that you could have influenced people. What did you do about it? So in response to that, this is why we're having this conference. And when I said it's not for everyone, it's not for everyone. I'm not expecting, 5,000 people to show up, right? But I'm expecting people that say, you know what? I'm an intelligent person. I've done well for myself. I'm living relatively comfortably. Why not put that to use and understand my neighbors, have an impact on them, have an impact on masjid policy when it comes to outreach, have an impact on, your coworkers. Understand that maybe your coworkers have some sort of deep-seated hatred for you and where it's coming from. Because whether you like it or not, many of the people you work with actually have that. You may be surprised. They may not tell you on your face, but they may have it. It's very real, right? So that's kind of my second point, and I'll conclude with one more point. How much time do I have left, by the way? 5 minutes. Okay, so that's good. I'll just wrap it up. That last point, and I'll just mention, sorry? 2 minutes. Oh, 15 minutes. Oh, you shouldn't have told me that, man. No, okay. Let me just kind of talk about some of the topics. And what we'll see is that they are atypical topics. Can we have like 5 to 10 minutes? For Q&A? Sure. So let me wrap up in 5. That's what you want? Okay, khalas. We'll do that, inshallah. Okay. So what are some of the topics? So one of the topics, for instance, is called God is Love, the 2,000-year-old false propaganda campaign. One of the things that we do at Sapiens is we try to get ahead of certain issues. As they come up in modernity, as they come up in, maybe some people call it post-modernity, as they start to come up, we don't want to be reactionary anymore. We want to get ahead of issues before they start becoming a problem. It was mentioned that we talked about atheism, right? But we were late to the game. We now have a whole range of issues. For instance, we have issues related to artificial intelligence. I don't think Muslims are equipped to deal with the type of psycho-spiritual trauma that's about to come about. All right? I'll give you an example just very quickly. I know I have 5 minutes. Actually, you know what? I'll skip it. I'll save it for Q&A. Okay. So in order to get in front of issues, this topic is talking about something that is quite prevalent, and that is this idea amongst Christians that God is love. God loves you. Jesus loves you. And your God in Islam, and there's quite a bit written on this, is a stern God, one that punishes, one that sends people to hellfire. And what this talk does is it flips it by going through elements of the Bible, elements of the Old Testament, Genesis, and so on, and looking at what is the conceptualization of the divine, of Allah, from their perspective, and how do we understand Allah being Arhamar Rahimin, right? And then seeing that, in fact, it's the exact opposite. That's one topic. Obviously, I mentioned Gaza and the Evangelical movement. That's going to be connecting theology to politics. I'll be talking about that tomorrow, bi'idhnillah. Navigating denominations. Most people, like I said, don't know how denominations came up, what denominations are extant in Texas, in Houston. People you're talking to when they say I'm Pentecostal, well, what does that even mean, man? Like, what does that mean? What is the backdrop to that, right? Or I'm Baptist. What does that mean? And so on. We'll have Sheikh Tahir White, who's going to be getting into Unitarian Christianity. One thing you may or may not know, that Thomas Jefferson was a Unitarian. And he actually took a razor to the Bible and cut out the verses that he found not reconciling with the oneness of Allah, interestingly enough, right? And other things. He had other problems, though, too. He talked about throwing away miracles and all sorts of other hyper-rationality. But nevertheless, Unitarian Christianity forms the bedrock of the United States. A lot of people don't know this. Many famous universities are founded by Unitarians, famous colleges. And he'll get into that. Sheikh Anwar Arafat will be talking about Mormonism. You know those guys that come in with like the short sleeves and they're riding their bikes around, like somebody knock on your door? I'd like to, talk to you about God or whatever, Jesus or whatever they say, right? He'll be getting to that. And that's very entertaining because he won't mind that I'm telling you this. So his father is from Gaza, his mother's from Utah. And she converted to Islam, but half his entire family is Mormon. So he's not only going to bring an academic side to it, but a personal side to it. He still has family that's Mormon. And this is the one that I said that, maybe a bit controversial. It's called God, Love, and Lust. Sex in Early Christianity, Modernity, and Islam. And like I said, these are out-of-the-box topics. But when you look at the current milieu that's out there, the culture wars that are ripping people apart, they say that Americans can't have Thanksgiving dinner anymore because they'll just go at each other. You've got liberals and you've got conservatives, and now they're getting further and further apart, right? One of those issues is the destruction of the family. But is repairing familial relations, is Christianity going to do that? Is a return to Christianity going to do that? Well, the problem is that's where some of the problems started, as Sheikh Yasser mentioned, because they went from one extreme to another extreme. Early Christianity was rooted in a type of monasticism where celibacy was the highest ethic if you were celibate. And there was reasons for that, but they went from that extreme to today where everything is open and lewd and just, charged in that domain, intimacy and so on and so on. It's all open. So this extreme from one to the other, like Sheikh Yasser likes to say, they went from over-regulation to over-celebration. And what's the correct path? In the middle. وَكَذَلِكَ جَعَلْنَاكُمْ أُمَّةٌ وَسَطًا. Like this, we made you a middle nation. And we have the keys to that. So he'll be getting into that. So that's just a brief overview of some of the topics we'll be talking about tomorrow. I'll highly encourage you to take a flyer. Come tomorrow, even if you can't come for the whole day. At least try to benefit. We just published the schedule on Instagram. So if you're looking at who's speaking when and what topics. But I will highly encourage you to come, participate. We don't want this to be a one-off event. So this is our Sapiens' kind of first major event in Houston, but we don't want it to be the last event. And with that, we would like you to come. We would like you to participate, give your information, and let us now come together and start to now strategize how we can solve the problem of Gaza, how we can make da'wah to our friends and neighbors from a place of compassion, which is supposed to be our hallmark because it was the hallmark of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So I'm going to stop there, and if you have some Q&A, I'm more than happy, inshallah. Yes, nice and loud. See, I love that question. Everyone asks it. It will be filmed. We don't know when and where it will be posted, because we are encouraging people to actually come and participate. I think there's a certain tradition that we've lost, and that's sohbah. Like there's a certain difference in listening to something on YouTube versus actually being in the presence of someone teaching it to you. So we're trying to encourage people to actually come. Eventually we may put it. This is, by the way, our third conference in America on the same topic. So we did one in Fairfax, Virginia, one in Tampa, Florida, and this is our third one in Houston. I think Houston is going to take it. And I'm not saying that because I'm biased and I live here. Well, actually, I'm saying that because I'm biased and I live here, but that's besides the point. But I think we're going to knock it out of the park, right? I have a lot of confidence in UHMSA, inshallah. All right, good question. But inshallah, we hope to at some point. But how soon, when? Allahu alam. I think you have someone behind you, by the way. Yeah. Yep.
Because if you are not taking this endeavor as a scholar and comparative religion, understanding other religions, but it's great for a layperson to understand the perspectives from the Islam lens.
Sure.
do you have like a roadmap for us or for me? Again, as a layperson, not like someone specialized
Sure.
in this space.
When you say late, if you don't mind me asking, what do you do professionally? I'm just curious.
Yeah, basically I'm a medical doctor.
Okay,
but
so you consider yourself a layperson. So I
I
personally,
mean in regards to this topic.
So I have a medical issue. I need your help with it. Can you help me out? My medical issue is I have this problem, right? As a doctor, it's called chronic optimism. Have you heard of it? I'll tell you, I think when you say layperson, like I get what you're saying, but I think you're discrediting yourself. I think that the topics we're presenting are not going to be, more complicated than what you've already studied, than what you interact with every day almost, right? The type of analysis you have to do, I'm sure, looking at the various type of things that come to your clinic or wherever you work, I don't think it's about a layperson. I think you absolutely have the potential to come and learn. And so when I say academic conference, I don't mean a conference where no one will understand anything. They'll be like, wow, he used some big words, epistemology and, teleology and, ontology and sounded really good. What did you learn? Nada. That's not the point. When I say academic, I'm talking about age maturity and that you live here, you interact here, you work here. So hopefully when you say, do I have a roadmap, this will be the first step to the roadmap, bi'idhnillah ta'ala. And Allah knows best.
This is a question on behalf of our brother sitting behind me. In Surah Al Imran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, O people of the scripture, why do you argue about Ibrahim while the Torah and the gospel were not revealed until after him? Then will you not reason? We all know the Abrahamic religions and everybody claims that Ibrahim is their prophet. And could this be the ultimatum of just kind of closing a debate with them, or does this just scratch the surface? That was what the brother is saying, is that just talk to them about that Ibrahim came before Judaism and so on. So
this was one of the arguments that was presented by the Christians of Najran, by the way. And this is what the ayah was revealed down to, because they started arguing about Ibrahim alayhi salam. So they started saying like, no, Ibrahim was a Jew. They say they were Christian. They say, look, and it's a very simple logical argument. Is that, look, how could he be a Jew when the concept of Judaism doesn't arrive until much later? And how could he be a Christian when the concept of Christianity doesn't arrive much later? Essentially, that's what the ayah is saying, right? So now, can this be used in a certain case? Maybe. Depends on your interlocutor, the person you're speaking to, and if they bring that argument up, right? What I kind of take from the ayat in Surah Al-Imran is obviously the argument itself, but also the backdrop of the argument, right? Remember, it's from the Christians of Najran. Many people don't know that the Christians of Najran come from a very specific strand of Christianity, right? They're known as Miaphysites, if I'm not pronouncing that right. They have a certain concept of how what we call Christology works. In other words, the nature of Jesus. So was he fully man and fully God and one nature? Or was he fully God and fully man and that's two natures? So the people say he's one nature. Those are the Christians of Najran from what we know so far. So with that backdrop, when these ayat come down, it's addressing that minutia as well, right? But it's important to study that in order to know, right, what can be applied to Christians today and what cannot be applied. Because Christians have evolved, and maybe if they're supporting Zionism, devolved. That was an academic joke. But anyways, to a great degree. So it's important that we know their backdrop to see what ayat can be applied to them, and what, where we can look for other arguments and things like that. And Allah knows best.
So I have another question personally, is that I had debates with Christians, evangelicals, Baptists, and they are so emotionally connected to what they believe. The Bible says that the God God will bless Israel, and if you do not bless Israel, then you are with the enemies, or you're cursed. You're gonna follow the Antichrist.
Genesis 12.
Yes.
Right.
So to them, they're so very emotionally connected to it.
Absolutely.
What would be a way to talk to them about this? I know you're gonna discuss it obviously in more detail tomorrow. I know. Is there some just kind of like a little?
A quick point. See, I wish I could say yes, but I can't, because it depends on the person you're talking to, their family, where they live, their background, where do they go to school, what's your relationship with them. So many variables that I can't just tell you, look, man, tell them Genesis 12, has certain problems with it when you apply it here. We could say that. That's a very simple, rational discussion, right? Say, look, it's the seed of Abraham, right? And whoever blesses, the verse in Genesis 12 says, when God speaks to Abraham in this verse, that whoever blesses, I will bless you and bless your seed, and whoever blesses you, I will bless them. Whoever curses you, I'll curse them. So they say, look, if we don't bless the Jews, we don't support Israel, well, Allah will curse us, right? God will curse us, okay? And that goes into a whole concept of American exceptionalism. We're going to lose our supremacy in the earth. But all of that has a backdrop too. Like, how did they get to this spot? And once you understand how they get to that spot, you could, like I said, make the argument, say, wait a minute, but when you're talking about blessing, who is the one that really is blessed? I mean, we in our salah, we say, Allahumma barik ala Muhammad wa ala ali Muhammad, kama barakta ala Ibrahim wa ala ali Ibrahim. Muslims across the world, and they're blessed. And in fact, the Bible later on goes on that your seed will be like the dust of the earth. Okay, are the few million Jews the dust of the earth? No. Who is it talking? It's talking about the Muslims. So you could have that intellectual discourse, but they have their own ways of blocking that off. And so what we're going to investigate tomorrow is, what are some of those ways? What are the psycho-spiritual dimensions to that, right? Like one question is, why can't Ismail alayhi salam be amongst the seed? They have certain reasons for that. They've already thought about it. We think that, okay, look, let's just give it to them. But there's a lot more there to unpack, inshallah. So,
can I ask one maybe commentary here?
Sure.
So, first of all, who are the seeds of Ibrahim alayhi salam, right? First of all, I think that's the question. So I have been thinking about it. So they call
Sure.
it Semitic people, right?
Sure.
And the people who are living in Palestine, for thousands of years,
Yeah.
they're also seed of Ibrahim.
Yep.
Ibrahim. Some of them also converted to
Sure.
Islam, right?
Sure.
At some point.
Yep.
And now let's take a look at the Jews
Yep.
who migrated to Israel,
Sure.
from different parts of the world, right?
Sure.
Russia, Poland,
Yep.
And how do they trace back to the seed of Ibrahim? So do they have any traceability of that one?
Right.
That's
So
my
if
question.
so, they're not running a 23andMe, right? They're not sending their DNA off to the
Right.
internet, and it's not being done. They have their own way of getting to that point. And like I said, it doesn't have to do with the actual fact. Because see, maybe because of our professions or whatever, we like to look at things as very like, okay, this needs to add up, right? Like, you're not really the seed of Abraham. Like, you can make that claim, right? Genetically, it's very factual, very rational, very clinical, very cerebral in a certain sense. But when I'll open the door for part of the discussion, which we're going to have tomorrow. When you look at how they were able to inoculate themselves, meaning how did the Christians protect themselves from the onslaught that came from Europe talking about the age of reason, because they started to undermine the Bible by biblical critical studies, which comes out of Germany, and they started to bring evolution in. Once they started doing that, there's an entire Christian move that says, okay, how are we going to deal with this? One way of dealing with this is, how do we undermine kind of logical arguments themselves? Well, instead of now talking about deep issues of theology and philosophy, we're going to now have people share their stories. That's why in a lot of, like, if you ever watch Joel Osteen and, these type of people, it's intense with stories. And so people would come, they'd tell their stories, and they say, I'm like this, and I was alcoholic, and and now I'm not because Jesus, and the wife is sitting in the back crying, the kids are happy, and look how his life was transformed. Who cares about your logic? He's a different man. How are you going to deal with that? You can't come now and say, well, are you really the seed of Abraham? I mean, it doesn't matter. They don't care. That person's life has been transformed. You've got to come with something else now, right? So that's what I'm saying. Yes, it's an academic conference, but it's academic conference to arm you not only with knowledge, but kind of knowledge of people's emotive, psycho-spiritual background, right? Like where they're coming from, culturally and historically and etc.
Just one comment, Assalamu alaikum. So
wait.
Yeah.
Oh, back there. Okay, sorry.
You were saying earlier the evangelists and how they're blindly supporting Israel, and
Yeah.
I think as they keep changing the Bible throughout the years, just in the late 1800s,
Yeah.
they added in the New Testament that Jesus will not come back until the state of Israel is up and running.
So they didn't really add that. They interpreted that.
No, they actually added it. It's in the New Testament.
Okay.
It's,
So the Schofield Bible,
Yeah.
the specific one, it's added in the commentary. And the Schofield Bible was one of the most popular.
It's again in the King James Version. It is in the King James Version. And
All right, just check up on that.
it was in the Anglican Church first, then it became. This is just in the late 1800s when the new
So,
Christian Zionists were
okay,
emerging.
fair enough, fair enough.
You know, like the time
could
of
be wrong.
Theodor Herzl and the others.
Sure, sure. Okay.
That's the main cause of why they are blindly supporting Israel. It's because of that, because they think if the state of Israel is not there, Jesus will not come back, and that's what's in the Bible. So that's why they're blindly.
So as far as I know, and what we're going to present tomorrow is the kind of the historical backdrop to that. That comes from something called dispensationalism.
Yeah.
So dispensationalism, it wasn't an Anglican that started that. John Nelson Darby was his name. And again, we're going to get into why that was even possible, right, in the first place. Like, why can you just interpolate something in the Bible or bring a certain interpretation? There's reasons for that. But when he comes up with that, that's one of the other things that gets imported to the U.S. as well, or the Americas. So we'll look into that tomorrow, the entire kind of historical backdrop. But you're right, they may have made changes, whether it was by actual text or whether it was by
It's in the King
interpretation.
James Version, I'm pretty sure.
Okay, all right.
In the New Testament.
All right.
Jazakallah.
Jazakallah khair. Khalas?
Inshallah, stop for
All right, we'll stop.
Any sisters would like to ask a question, just to give the chance for the sisters? No questions. Okay.
Okay. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika, ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta.
Jazakumullah khair, Sheikh. Barakallah feek. All right, we'll raise the adhan and then the iqama immediately after. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar.